Yep, it's that time of day again where I go and complain about modern video games, everyone's favorite reoccurring topic on this channel. And now I know what you're wondering. What's another video game company? Another AAA video company that charges you $70 for a brand new video game, but yet somehow they're able to mess it up in some way. Well, today is a brand new game known as Redfall. Now, Redfall is a game that a lot of people were super excited for, as this is made by the same studio who made games like the Disarmor series, a series that is extremely liked, and a lot of people, hold that series at very high regards and basically say that this is a very capable studio. The last big game they ended up releasing ended up being Deathloop, and Deathloop was a video game, alright. That's the best way to describe it. I don't really consider it as the best game, as I see the most fun you can have in that game is just walking around and just kicking people and sending them like miles flying, because the kick in that game was just unbelievably overpowered. So you could do that like thousands of times, and then the game is just generally just win itself. But today they ended up revealing their next game, Redfall, and they ended up having some gameplay trailer of it. Now, the gameplay trailer has not been received well at all. The way how the gameplay looks in Redfall just looks extremely bad. Looks like a very generic bullet sponge like looter game. Just like when I see the gameplay and just the UI of this game, it just looks so flat and unoriginal. But that's not the one thing I'm talking about. I'm here to talk about this right here. Now, this game is going to be launching on next generation consoles, the Xbox Series S. Consoles which are still pretty expensive. They're like $500, and if you live in some other countries, they could be even higher. Some of them could be like $600 or maybe even like $1,000 in some other places of the world. These are still pretty expensive consoles, and they are considered to be the strongest consoles in the world. So I 100% think if you're spending that much money on a console, it should be able to run game consistently. I don't really care what anyone says. Again, games are getting really expensive, and if I'm spending money on this super powerful, the quote-unquote strongest console in the world, you end up thinking that, oh, the games I should buy should run properly. Well, they ended up making this tweet right here, which is just absolutely insane to me, which is basically saying that this game is going to run 4K 30 frames per second on the Xbox Series S. Hello, it's me, Lou, from the future. Let me mention this part right here. It's running 30 frames per second, and they're going to update it to be 60 frames per second at a later date, which is just absolutely insane. I mean, you're basically just releasing an incomplete game. Yeah, the game is going to run extremely choppy and bad now, but it will run good later. Absolutely ridiculous. This is just unacceptable. I literally don't care what anyone says. Games should not be running at this point. I think we should be at the point of console gaming where 120 frames per second should basically be the standard. That's what I 100% think that most games should run at, because the console should be powerful enough to run games at that. All these people do is talk about the marketing and how strong and how powerful their consoles is, but it's clearly not. Why am I spending, again, $70 for these games? And if you live in some other countries, they can be up to $90 for a game that doesn't even come feature complete, because your game running counts as feature complete. If you buy a game that's completely glitchy and unplayable, you bought an unfinished game. You basically bought an alpha version of the game, like the last port I ended up getting mad over, which was The Last of Us Part 1 port. That's clearly an unfinished game. They didn't even care enough to optimize the game, and you're literally doing that here. Just delay the game. I think we're at the point where most people are pretty acceptable with delays, especially after the whole Cyberpunk situation that launched. You don't see people getting extremely mad if you do a delay. So if you're clearly having this much trouble getting the game optimized, just delay the game and release it later. I generally don't think anyone who's excited for the game, which literally I can't really find anyone who's excited for the game, but there's probably someone who's out there, they would probably be fine with just waiting a little bit longer so they can actually go and get a feature complete game, instead of you just releasing this saying that your game is going to be 30 frames per second, and then like the actual game to run 60 frames per second is going to come later. That's just absolutely ridiculous and literally unacceptable. And the worst part about this whole situation is that people have defended this. I think it's crazy that we're generally at the point where on the internet where people will literally defend anything. You could do the most craziest things of all time, and you would have an army of people who are 100% there trying to defend you. Why? I literally don't know. This garbage should literally not be defended. Why are you literally openly going on Twitter or going on any social medias and literally just saying that this is literally going to be acceptable? This is one reason why I literally think games keep on releasing bad, because people keep on letting publishers get away with this. It's just completely unacceptable. One thing that I always think is always crazy to me, that indie game developers get judged extremely hard. Like if you release an indie game, your first ever game project, and that game is like price reasonable, like $15, and the game isn't like a masterpiece, you have so much people coming out of nowhere completely blasting the indie game developer. But when a AAA company who was selling the game for like 70 something dollars, they come out and say absolute crazy stuff like this, you have people defending it, which makes absolutely no sense to me. It's completely unacceptable that you're charging this much for a game and you don't even care enough to go finish the game. Now I know when it comes to game developers, there's a lot of deadlines and stuff that has to be reached. Usually you'll be a publisher publisher or maybe an investor coming out saying that I want the game to be released at this time because it's going to reach the most maximum amount of profits. Or mainly this game is going to launch on Game Pass. It's probably a lot of the higher ups on Xbox saying that we should release this game as soon as possible so people can have something to do to play on Game Pass. I do understand that stuff like that completely do exist. But my argument is that the reason why it's got this bad is because people have defended this action for extremely long time. People keep on letting these big developers get away with releasing absolutely terrible and unfinished games, which just leads to stuff like this releasing, which is just absolutely just unacceptable. Just let your developer finish the game. Let your developers actually do their job. Let them finish the game so we can actually get like a good and complete product at launch instead of just you having to play catch up. Because most of the time, you can't recover from the catch up situation. A good example is a game like Halo Infinite. That game ended up launching extremely badly, and now the game is basically dead. Yeah, there are still people playing the game, but that game is never going to reach peak numbers that it used to ever again, unless some miracle happens. If your game released badly, unless if you're like something like Destiny 2 or something like Call of Duty, you're probably not going to get away with a terrible game release, and it's probably just going to kill your game for the foreseeable future. This action just needs to be stopped. We need to stop normalizing letting these big developers release bad games. It's just getting ridiculous at this point. Anyway, this is episode 500 and whatever of Man in a Mask complaining about how terrible modern game it is, and absolutely nothing will get done because we obviously don't learn from our mistakes, and we just make the same mistake over and over again. And probably the same thing is going to happen where this game is going to release, most likely die on arrival, and then the developers are going to try their hardest to patch the game, and then just like most games in this situation, support will probably end halfway through, and then basically everyone who plays the game was just, just going to get their time wasted, and that just is what it is. Anyway, my name is Lua. This is just something that I want to talk about. You have a good day or night. See ya.